This is Sente, the Atari VCS podcast.
When games came out for the Atari 800, I noticed that how the overall, the average, the quality of the games was not nearly as good as the 2600. And I think that's just because so many more people were programming it, and it was much easier to program.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Lee Actor created Advanced Music System, which was published by Atari Program Exchange. It first appeared in the spring 1982 APX catalog, where it won first prize in the Personal Interest and Development category. He also published Jukebox No. 1, which first appeared in the summer 1982 catalog, a collection of music files for Advanced Music System. There was no follow-up Jukebox No. 2. He was also involved with the MIDI Music System by Hybrid Arts, a product that connected the Atari 8-bit computers to MIDI instruments. He worked at Videa, where he wrote the game Lasercade for the Atari VCS, and Sente Technologies, where he created the coin-op titles Snake Pit and Hat Trick. This interview took place on May 23, 2016. In it, we discuss Ed Rotberg, whom I previously interviewed.
I got interested in computers when I was in high school in the 60s. At that time, there was, of course, no personal computers. No such thing as, I should say. My high school, I went to school in Denver. I think that the school district either rented or bought an IBM 1130 and had it in a van, and it circulated among all the high schools. So it was really kind of neat to have a hands-on experience with a computer. That most people didn't even see a computer at that time. It was either a teletype that was connected to some other mainframe somewhere, some unknown place, or the other thing that I was able to do in high school was we had an agreement with the University of Denver for our computer students to use their what did they have, a Burroughs something or other mainframe. And so we would punch up our cards, bring them down to the University of Denver, hand them in, wait for a couple days, get them back, get a printout, that kind of thing. So that's when I got interested in computers. And then, of course, when I was in school, in college, I was not a computer science major. I was an electrical engineering major, but did quite a bit of computer stuff. It was really as an adjunct to engineering things, but again, it was an IBM 360 mainframe kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. In my first job out of school, I specialized in digital communication systems, which was a pretty new field at that time. I was working for a GTE Sylvania and did some work in voice recognition, again, very early days, this is mid-'70s, and also a digital implementation of a high-security modem communications that GTE had with, I guess it was probably the Air Force. So I had hands-on with a very, very fast, what they called a digital signal processor. It was basically a tabletop computer, customized. It was pretty much the fastest thing around at the time, which today wouldn't even power a hand calculator, but you could do real-time digital signal processing on it. In any case, eventually I left engineering. I went back into my other field of interest, which was music. I went back to school, got a graduate degree in music composition, and was in the process of presumably getting a doctorate at University of California, Berkeley, and then supposedly, which is pretty much all you can do with a degree in music composition, teach. One summer I had kind of some free time, and this was about 19 80, I guess. And the personal computer field had come into existence not that long before, and I had kind of avoided it because I knew if I even started looking at it, I would really get sucked in. But that summer, I decided I had some time, and I got myself an Atari 800, played around with it. One of the first things I saw was that the music software was just really horrible, and I thought, well, geez, I can do something better than that. And I started, just for my own amusement, programming an application that would allow you to input notes of any duration, at any tempo, of any complexity, and play them back. And the more I got into this, the more it became more sophisticated and more features and so on. And ultimately, it actually became a product, which Atari sold in their consumer. I can't remember the name of the thing, but they had a consumer a thing where they, people would submit products and then they would give prizes and so on. And
right, the Atari Program Exchange.
Yeah, that was it. Program Exchange.
So did you you submitted it through the usual channels?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I, for whatever period of time that was, I won, and then they had a big yearly thing, and I didn't win the yearly thing, but the project was quite successful. And through some people that I knew at Atari, they told me, a guy used to work here that you would get along with. Well, he has kind of similar interests to you, computers and music and so on. You should look this guy up and talk to him. And that guy was Ed Rotberg. So got his number, called him up, and said, "Yeah, why don't you come in and we can chat." So, I did that. At that time, Ed and two of his compatriots, Roger Hector and Howie Delman, they had left Atari fairly recently, and they just started up their own company in Sunnyvale. And when I went to see Ed, I recall they had no employees. They might have had a secretary. Maybe they didn't even have a secretary, but they just moved into their offices. And, we were chatting, and we did have, a number of common interests. And after a while, Ed said, "Well, you should come work here." And I said, "Well, I'm not really looking for a job. I'm going to go get my PhD in music composition and so forth and so on."
And what was his company at that point?
That was Videa.
Videa.
Videa. And I said, "But just out of curiosity, what would you pay somebody to do this stuff?" And he told me, and I was thinking, geez, that's a lot more than I can get paid as a professor. But I said, "Well, thanks, but no thanks. I'm going down a certain path." But it did get me thinking, and I was, for a number of reasons, I was not real happy with the way things were going in my doctorate program. I had a over 50-mile commute, and I was I was pushing 30 at the time, and I was thinking, geez, this is going to take me several more years, and I'm not going to be able to choose where I get a job. It's going to be somewhere else, probably. And we had, my wife and I started a family. We came out to California because she got a job with Intel as a materials engineer, and we were not going to be moving from Silicon Valley. So over a period of months, I was kind of reevaluating. I thought, why don't I take a leave of absence and try this other thing out, see how it works. So I did in 1982. I took a leave of absence from Cal, and guess what is this, 2016? 34 years later, I'm still on leave of absence.
But I might be expecting you back sometime.
I don't think so. But I started working at Videa. It was a small group. We reverse engineered the Atari 2600, and the first game I did was for the Atari 2600. I guess the mission of the company was was probably mainly coin operated, and there was one coin operated game in development while Videa was still an independent entity, and I think we did two 2600 cartridges, me and another engineer, and pretty sure there was some kind of side project. I don't recall exactly what those were.
Were you working on the actual programming or just the music for the sound for the games?
Oh, no. Design, programming, sound effects, some art. I mean, when you have only 4K to do an entire game, including, data, you end up doing an awful lot of it.
Sure. And what games were those? Do you remember?
My game was Lasercade. Okay. It was actually has the distinction of being one of the few games that was ever sold to two different companies. It was sold to Fox. This was at the kind of the height of the home video game industry in 1983, before the crash. And I remember that CES show that year. I was there for at least 2 days, and I couldn't even visit every video game booth. There were so many companies there. Anyway, sold to Fox. Shortly after that, it might have been a month or two, the industry crashed. Fox ended up backing out, and then Videa ended up selling it again to Atari. And I don't think they produced it either, but it was kind of funny that they that game was sold twice. And the other game, I can't remember the name of it. Sorry about that. Been a long time.
Sure.
30 years. But it wasn't that long after that. It was I think it was that same year that Videa was purchased by Nolan Bushnell. And the company was renamed Sente. And maybe a little wider. Maybe it was Sente for a while. Then it was Sente Technologies. It was purchased by Pizza Time Theater. That's right. And we kind of expanded. We started concentrating on coin-operated games exclusively, and I did several of those. Actually, I did the first coin-operated game for the company. It was on hardware that was designed to have to be easily replaceable. In other words, you would sell a cabinet, and the artwork, the control panel, the game. It was actually a game cartridge. They could all be replaced, so lowers the cost to the operator, which is a good idea. But it kind of came at a time when the coin-operated industry as a whole was starting to weaken. But the first game I did was Snake Pit, coin-operated game for that hardware. And probably the most successful game I did while I was there was Hat Trick, a two-person hockey game. I still get people writing to me about it. Actually, people are interested in a game that was never commercially produced, which was four-player Hat Trick. And apparently there's still a couple of them floating out there. And the reason it wasn't produced is basically it was just too expensive. But it was a heck of a lot of fun. So anyway, that was my experience there. Eventually, the company was sold to Bally. It became Bally Sente. After some period of time, Bally decided to cut down the company quite a bit and put everybody on contract as independent contractors. That lasted, I believe, less than a year before they decided to just shutter the whole thing down. Meanwhile, at the kind of the end of that period, a guy I'd been working with for some time, Dennis Coble, and I decided to start our own independent company to do third-party development for the big publishers. And the first project we did was for Electronic Arts called PGA Tour Golf.
Okay.
Which, after a rough start for a year or two, it became one of their key items. It became a series of products, and they sold in the millions of these. For first one was on the PC platform. What we did, Sega Genesis, and then people did SKUs for every conceivable platform. That became a very successful product, and we did a lot of arcade conversions for Atari Tengen, for Sega Genesis, and we did a key product for Sega. At one point, they were. Let's see what was happening. They had their Sonic the Hedgehog series, which was their big property, and those were all done in Japan. And one Christmas they were going to miss. They could see coming up they were not going to have a product in time. So the U.S. One of the U.S. branches of Sega, I guess it was called Sega Technical Institute, was being run by Roger Hector, who was an old friend of both Dennis and mine. And he called us and said, we've got an emergency, we've got to get a product done in like 4.5 months. And we said, well, that's basically impossible. But long story short, we just basically dropped everything else and went full steam ahead, 7 days a week, not 24 hours a day, but sometimes it seemed like it. I mean, I think I left my house one time that whole summer. We did bang out a product. I wouldn't say it was the best product we ever did, but it was the best-selling product we ever did. Which
what was it?
It didn't hurt. That was Sega Sonic Spinball.
Okay.
I know that Sega sold well in excess of 2 million of those, which was not bad. And a couple of years went by. This was at a time, I mean, the whole time that Dennis and I were developing products, and we did many, well over a dozen products, we just worked in our home offices, and we would subcontract for art occasionally, maybe for music or sounds, and that's it. That was the whole team. And as time went on, products were starting to become more and more complicated, bigger and bigger teams, and we could kind of see the writing on the wall that we were not going to be able to continue to do competitive products the way that we had been doing them. So an opportunity came along that Universal Studios wanted to start a video game development division in San Jose, and our friend Roger Hector and Dennis and myself took that on and started a company, got office space near downtown San Jose, and we did that for 3 years. And I would say that to be kind, Universal was not the most supportive company. Eventually, they decided they didn't really want to be in the game development business. They wanted to be in the selling our property license business. Mm-hmm. We did come out with a product. I also found that I wasn't nearly as happy, being the manager of a product as I was being the creator or the designer or the implementer of the project. So that, like I said, that lasted 3 years, and that all went away. I decided to take a job in a startup, a local startup, for a year. So I was the director of engineering at a place for a year. It was a completely different business. For reasons I won't get into, that didn't work out the way I had hoped, and I decided to more or less retire. And it was at that point where, for another series of reasons which are probably of not great interest to your listeners, I got back into music, and over the past 15 years, basically what I've been doing is writing music. So nice. Composing and a reasonable amount of conducting as well. So awesome. Yeah, I've been in the video game industry since '99.
And so now you get to compose. That's it. So what classical music or
yeah,
what kind of?
Most of I guess you would say classical. Most of what I write is for is orchestral music. So I got into a situation where there's actually a local orchestra, the Palo Alto Philharmonic, which my wife had played in for years. They needed an assistant conductor, and I kind of fell into that. And the music director looked at my resume and said, "Oh, I see you're a composer. Would you like to write something for the orchestra?" Now, at that point, I hadn't written anything for 20 years, more or less. And I I did. I wrote a relatively short piece. It was pretty successful. And I wrote another one, and other people started hearing things, and I was started getting commissions from various places, and one thing led to another, and I had a career that I really never planned on. So at this point, I've had pieces performed by about 70 different orchestras and bands all over the world.
Wow.
Literally hundreds of performances. I produced 4 CDs, and that's what I'm doing now.
Cool. So I want to talk a little bit more about your Atari 400, 800 stuff. You did the
Right.
Advanced Music System, and that won its first prize in the Personal Interest and Development category. And then in the next catalog, you came out with a jukebox of music for it. And so I'm just kind of curious how those sold, and if you got feedback from users, and just kind of tell me a little bit more about that process.
I don't recall actual sales numbers. I just recall that it did sell very well. The Advanced Music System, the Jukebox, which I had completely forgotten until you mentioned it, was kind of an add-on thing where I had put together a number of different songs or pieces or whatever. Some were movie music, some were this or that. I don't really recall exactly what they were, and just sold it as a plug in the disc and it plays. And those that didn't sell as well as the main product, of course, but it did sell. I did get a lot of feedback on Advanced Music System. 'Cause one of the things I did was I put I put a feature in it that I thought that probably nobody but me would ever use, which was you probably recall the Atari sound chip had a maximum of 4 voices.
Sure.
Which, it's fine for a barbershop quartet, but for more complex music, it's really not enough. And I thought, well, what if I multi-track the 4 voices so I can get 8 or 12 or 16 or whatever, and I happen to have a multi-track tape recorder, and the only trick is to be able to sync one take to another. So I put a feature in that gave some timing beeps or something before it would play the piece, and you could more or less sync it if you had a multi-track tape recorder. But I had done a demo of the first movement of the Rachmaninoff Second Piano Concerto, which is pretty complex, and I'd done it in 16 voices. Now they still all sound like pokey sounds, basically square waves, but it was kind of impressive for what it was, at least 35 years ago. And I had an offer in the manual that people could send me, I don't know what it was, $5, $10, but whatever it was, and I would send them a cassette of this thing. So I got a lot of feedback because of that, if for no other reason, because a lot of people wanted to hear that thing, and then they would write me and tell me how much they enjoyed the product and so forth, which was kind of a nice thing to have.
Nice. Do you have any of those cassettes anymore?
I don't know. There may be one somewhere in a corner somewhere. I really don't know.
I'll pay you $5 for one, so I would love to hear it. We'll digitize that.
It really sounds, compared to nowadays, it sounds extremely cheesy.
Of course it does, but it's Atari, so it's good.
Right.
Yeah. So the product was called Jukebox number 1. You see, I guess you entered all this stuff by hand. You had Flight of the Bumblebee and Boxer and the G string quartet in E flat by Mozart, Brandenburg Concerto number 5, Well-Tempered Clavier by Bach for Elise.
Clavier, yeah. Obviously you know much more about this than I do.
I'm just reading the catalog, so
I know.
So you just entered all that data by hand, and just it seems exhausting, frankly.
Yeah, well, it did it using the program, of course.
Right.
It was I designed it so it would, once you got the hang of it, note entry could be very rapid.
Oh, okay. And there was no Jukebox number 2, so I guess it didn't sell well enough to keep your interest. Is that one?
Probably not.
You did, for a different publisher, you did Advanced Music System 2.
Right.
Can you tell me about that?
Who was the publisher?
Lots of Bytes. It was published by Lots of Bytes.
I honestly don't remember what the difference was. And
Okay.
that was for the Atari 400, 800?
Yes, it was.
Because I do remember doing a MIDI version of that product for Hybrid Arts. They sold a
Right.
MIDI interface for the Atari 800.
That was going to be my
But
next question.
Well, yeah, the Advanced Music System 2, I don't know. I probably added some features, but I don't really recall what they were.
All right. Fair enough. So I assume that you did that once Atari Program Exchange went away. You went hunting for another publisher. Okay.
Yeah,
Added some
I
features
think it was more a case of the publisher came first or met somebody and said, gee, it'd be nice to do some other version of, oh, okay, well, we could do this and this and this. Okay, let's do that. I think that's probably what happened.
Sure.
The same thing with the MIDI Music System.
So did Hybrid Arts have this hardware, and then did they approach you to create software for it, or how did that come along? Yeah.
I don't remember where we met them. Met them at some point, and I said, "Gee, we have this interface. We'd like to, we'd like to have some software for it." And at that time, I had a little company with another friend of mine named Gary Levenberg, who also worked for Sente. He was the sound and music guy, and we had done some various little projects. And however that came about, they sold. Maybe they might have even bundled it. I don't remember. But the other thing which you might not know about was when I was at Sente, or whatever name it was called at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, for coin-operated games, we needed tools to do sound effects and music and so on. And I was interested in that, and that was one of the things I did. Now, the coin-operated hardware that we started using was actually the first coin-operated hardware that had a dedicated synthesizer board for sounds and music. It was a 6-voice board that we OEM from Sequential Circuits, who was one of the early manufacturers of synthesizers. And what I did was I spent some time and I developed a tool, music, and I think you could do sound effects too with it. But it directly interfaced with with this board that we used in our coin-operated games, and was kind of the takeoff of it was Advanced Music System. Did some other, obviously some very custom things for it, but it allowed us to have a very easy-to-use music development tool. In other words, the interface was something that musicians could understand, and the output was something that the software programmers could use. So that was the end point of the development of that series of products. It was an in-house tool, custom tool.
Nice. If you could send a message to the people who used your Atari programs and games back in the day and who are listening to this now, what would you tell them?
I would say, thanks for the early support. It was, it's always great to get, good feedback and positive feedback from people who are using things that you create. And I was always very fond of the Atari, and that's about it.
I think I have what I need. Thank you so much.
And I have to say, I'm still amazed that after all these years, people are still interested in that old stuff.
It's fun. It's still fun. It was fun then, and it's fun now.
Yeah, well, I learned very early on that the fun factor in games had very, very little to do with the hardware and a whole lot to do with who was programming it. I mean, the Atari 26 hardware was so primitive, even by standards back then. I mean, you had to program the display as the television beam scanned across the tube. So your code had to be timed such that you could change things in the horizontal blanking interval before it displayed the line, and then change it for the next line. But there were so many really great games that were developed for the Atari 2600. I'm convinced that it was because the people who could cut through that morass of technical difficulty were really, really good at what they were doing. And the time I started noticing this was when games came out for the Atari 800. I noticed that how the average, the quality of the games was not nearly as good as the 2600. And I think that's just because so many more people were programming, and it was much easier to program, I mean, obviously.
Right.
Not that there weren't some great games for the 800, but on the 2600, there was just a real high hit rate.
Right. The average skill level of a programmer on the 800 was lower than on the 2600, just because you didn't need to know as much. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, yeah. So I hope your listeners find something of interest in this.
I think they will. Thank you very much. Good. I appreciate your time today.
Thanks.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a non-profit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.